Good day, everyone. Today, we will going to talk about the major contemporary global issues that we are facing right now. And it is being said that the most important dynamics of the 21st century is the shift of the focus from international relations to global relations and issues. Before the existence of revolutions in technology, transportation, and communication, the characterization of interdependence and globalization are exerting pressures on nation states that strengthen them in some ways but weakens them too. And now, states that played the leading role in international affairs are now dealing with the declining of power as global power is more diffused with the rise of China, Brazil, India, and other emerging market countries. In this context, the chapter that examines the major contemporary global issues that are concerning humanity at large in the 21st century. In particular, the chapter discusses four themes. These are global security issues, global environmental issues, global socio-economic issues, and global cultural issues. Survey of the major contemporary global issues. Today, this period is now well established, though it is still referred as the post-Cold War period. This period is when world politics has transformation, since if we go back to the Cold War period, world politics is not defined essentially by an ideological, since it was controlled by the US and USSR, which is they are struggling for military powers. The agenda of this context is which political activity takes place on. It's no longer the world politics dominated the rising conflicts between the West and the East, or the threat of revolutions or war or nuclear war, the struggle of understanding the ideological perspective between liberal democracy and Marxism, Leninism, crisis, diplomacy, and so on. The international community is now preoccupied with other issues such as environmental issues, social issues, the disparities in wealth between developed and developing countries, the impact of terrorism, and so on. We are really and evidently seeing our surroundings that are experiencing those issues. On the emergence of new issues replacing old, understates important elements of continuity in world politics and lack sense of historical perspective. The question that remains, what makes an issue a global issue?
So, good day everyone. I am Neil Vidalio and I'm about to discuss to you the global terrorism under the global security issues. So, what is global terrorism? It is actually the actual use of violence or illegal force by non-state actors to attain political, economic, religious, social goal through fear, coercion, and intimidation. In addition to that, we have two main issues and challenges facing the emerging new world order, and these are the terrorism and nuclear proliferation. So let's talk about the terrorism. It is defined by many as a global security problem characterized by the use of violence in form of hijacking, bombing, hostage-taking, and other indiscriminate attacks on civilian targets. Next is the nuclear proliferation. It is the spread of nuclear weapons, fissionable materials, and weapons applicable nuclear technology and information to nations. Unfortunately, it is not recognized as nuclear weapon states by the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or commonly known as the Non-Proliferation Treaty or NPT. And that's it.
Good day everyone. First, let me introduce myself. I am Aubrey Lemo from BSIS 1-1. For today's lesson, we're going to talk about global terrorism. Under that is the factors to conductive terrorism and also the types of terrorism. So let's proceed in the factors conductive to terrorism. First is the socio-economic cause. Poverty in the sense of economic and political isolation, feeling of hopelessness that violates human rights. The lack of democracy provides a fertile breeding and the ground of terrorism. So for example, there's someone who commits ungrateful actions that lead to terrorism because he wants to represent himself, enable for them to be heard by the governing system or a nation, the government of a nation. So he tends to do some acts that violates human rights and affects people. Next is the lack of democracy and widespread and systematic violations of human rights contributes to the rise of terrorism. There are a lot of nations that doesn't practice the democracy. So its people, its governing people, doesn't represent themselves in their free will. We are lucky to have a democracy country here in the Philippines because we are able to vote, we are able to choose whose individuals that going to govern our own. So next is the political cause. It is a legitimate grievances and a failure of governments to adequately address these problems, often for terrorism. So, political cause, our government system cannot operate or control those people because some are, for example, some are didn't want the leader to lead. So, but they won. So it's a factor. Major factor for terrorism. Next is psychological cause. Humiliation is another factor of conductive to use of terrorism. The violence, whatever race, skin color, facial features, physical features of an individual, it doesn't seem have unequal rights for people because as a matter of fact, people seems not good in having respect with others. Not the majority, but as a matter of fact. Psychological cause. So, whatever the race of individual, it will leads a factor that may leads to terrorism and able to fight for their freedom or will to live in this modern world. Next is, let's proceed to the type of terrorism. First is the domestic terrorism. Occurs within the borders of a particular country, is associated with extremist groups. So, it is against civilian population or infrastructure of a nation. It is a small terrorism, for example, an individual who is using violence or terrorism under a mall or a public place. Next is the nationalist terrorism. It is closely associated with the struggles for political autonomy and independence. So, the governing system or the government doesn't seem to have control with its people. It is mostly establishing a completely independent states. Next is the religious terrorism. Grows out of extreme fundamentalist religious group that believe that God is on their sides and reveals divinely inspired and approved. As we know, we do have different kinds of perception or beliefs towards something. So, those individuals who are fighting for their freedom or religion seems that God is within them, even though they are not doing grateful acts, they're practicing evil actions. Next is The state terrorism, it is a cold, calculated, efficient, and extremely destructive. The form of terrorism, partly because of the overwhelming power of disposal of the government. Here comes the allies of the groups, extremist groups. So it is kinda destructive because there are too much power, too much individuals included in that terrorism. Next is the global terrorism, is a partly an outgrowth of the forces of globalization, which enable the different kinds of terrorism to spread worldwide. It includes incentives and opportunities through globalization. As we know, globalization is the process of coming of the businesses system in our governing system or over the world. So those individuals were fighting for their freedom to have an opportunity for their life, to sustain their necessities. That's all. So, enable for us to cope up with these major problems, we must also understand the deeper scope of this terrorism. What are the factors, what are the leads, or what are the causes of those actions. So, as a human, we must always respect different kinds of perceptions and beliefs toward others. That we must practice the good or we must be a moral upright individuals. Also, to understand different kinds of matters in our surrounding. That's all. Thank you.
Good morning everyone, I'm Patricia Karinga from BSIS 1-1. So now we were going to tackle about nuclear weapons and their proliferations. So first, let's discuss about what is nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons are also known as atom bomb, atomic bomb, nuke, nuclear warhead, A-bomb, or nuclear bomb. All of those nuclear weapons can release energy in an explosive manner. In fact, these nuclear weapons have been used twice in war by US against Japan near the end of the World War II. So basically, the nuclear proliferation is the increase of the nuclear weapons and the spread of those weapons to those countries who are still not possessing or acknowledging it. There are countries who are known by having nuclear weapons. These are the United States, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, China, Pakistan, and the North Korea. So those are the countries who are known by having the nuclear weapons. So next, let's discuss about the 7 reasons for the proliferation of weapons. So first is superpower rivalry during the Cold War. So from the term superpower, there are 2 countries who are known or being labeled as superpowers. These are the United States and the Soviet Union. So during the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, it resulted in anti-communist suspicions and international incidents that led the 2 superpowers to the brink of the nuclear weapons. So this is where the geopolitical considerations influenced the United States and the Soviet Union to transfer their weapons to their respective allies. Next is the military burden sharing. So military burden sharing, this is basically where the 2 superpowers will provide a weapon to their ally countries who are still not possessing them so that they can defend or protect themselves. So one of the examples of this was the Nixon Doctrine, which supported Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and other Asian countries to transfer weapons. If you are wondering what is Nixon Doctrine, it is a U.S. foreign policy made by President Richard Nixon to support their allies who are facing military threats. So next is the regional balance of power. So regional balance of power aims to maintain the balance of a particular geographical or political region. So this is important up until now. Why? because they need to secure if one state should not become more powerful than the other state. Because for sure, if that happens, the powerful countries will take advantage to those weaker countries. So that is regional balance of power. So that's all for my part. The other 4 reasons will be discussed by my other group mate. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Angela Katubig from BSIS 11 and I am here to talk about the last 4 reasons for the proliferation of weapons. An example for political, military, and economic influence is the United States and the Middle East. As we all know, the United States depend on oil from the Middle East. In return, the United States will transfer weapons, defense weapons, or equipments to the Middle East in order to gain and maintain access to the country's political, military, and economic elites, and which will also help strengthen the country's security. In economies of scale, countries export weapons in order for them to gain funds for developing and producing more advanced weapons. In self-reliance, countries rely on themselves in making their own equipments or defense weapons in order for them to preserve their independence. Last but not the least is economic factors. In economic factors, much of the global weapons trade is motivated by financial considerations. Ethnic conflicts generate demand for weapon transfer. In authoritarian regimes, governments that rule without the consent of its people will use military force and weapons to exercise their control on their people and to keep them from gaining independence.
Good day everyone, I am Rielan Empatino and I will be tackling global environmental issues. In this day and age, the environment is gradually becoming one of the most pressing matters in the 21st century. It has been recognized that many, if not all, problems of environmental degradation are transboundary in nature and therefore require an international solution. Due to this, many national policy measures essentially cannot cope with these environmental problems, as the source of pollution or the impact of pollution sometimes lies outside of the jurisdiction of a particular state. One of the main global environmental issues is climate change and global warming. In climate change and global warming, there are interconnected processes and effects that contribute to the degradation of the environment. Global warming pertains to the gradual heating of the Earth's atmosphere and thus affecting the environment through the constant rise of temperature. This causes the change in condition known as climate change, which is the gradual changing of natural occurring conditions such as the weather. Climate change poses numerous and harsh challenges for sustainable development, and its effects are felt in all regions of the globe, although the intensity of exposure varies very differently. This degree of variety is caused also by the general location of different places. Due to this, changes in the environmental conditions will gradually be shown, such as one of the best examples is the Arctic, or rather the polar regions, wherein the ice caps are now currently melting, which causes the rise in sea level. This rise in sea level therefore also leads to the submerging of several small island regions, which are mostly surrounded by water. The degree of vulnerability varies even more with developing countries and the deprived, which have contributed to the least which have contributed the least to global warming but are suffering the most. This is due to the effects of the more industrialized this is a result of the more industrialized countries wherein due to the large populations, resources are often more exploited in order to properly serve the needs of the people and the entire country itself. Although the developing countries contribute least to these, due to their status as semi-periphery countries, there needs to exploit resources in order to better the lives of their own population, are also intertwined with providing the resources for core countries which have large population and are in need of importing products from other countries in order to properly serve the demands of the country.
Hi everyone, my name is Princess Rutan Maraon and I'll be discussing another major contemporary issues, and this is the global socio-economic issues. Under this is the global inequality and poverty. In the last 2 decades of the 20th century and this century were characterized by the widening gap between rich and poor and the proliferation of the millionaires and billionaires. When the economy deteriorates, the gap between these two statuses became narrower and the concern regarding the inequality are heightened. Inequality will not automatically be a major concern, not until when this inequality gets integrated with another factor. For example, inequality in a booming economy and an inequality in a deteriorated economy. When we say booming economy, the economy is still at its peak, so there's still lots of opportunities, not only to those individuals who's on top of the ladder, but also to those who's at the bottom of the ladder. There's still job opportunities, a lot of trades and goods, increasing profits. To put it simply, as long as you earn something equivalent to the amount of labor or work you did, then this inequality would still not be a major concern. Moving on to the next example, the inequality in a deteriorated economy. Why is this economy considered as a huge concern? Basically, it is a huge concern because unlike the first inequality wherein it is still at its peak, this inequality hits rock bottom, meaning to say every individual, no matter what status, there will be limited opportunities. Extreme inequality perpetuates poverty, the concentration of economic and political power, and also reduces the economic efficiency, thus strengthening the inequality perpetuating institutions in 3 ways. First, people in poverty would have diminishing access to education, healthcare, and other services that can contribute to the economic and developmental growth. Next is that due to the limited number of people who has access to knowledge, the rule of law would only be applicable and beneficial to those who have privilege. Lastly, inequality enables the wealthy to refuse to compromise politically or economically, which further weakens poor societies in a global society scale.
Hi, I'm Romero's Laura from BSIS 1-1 and I will discuss about migration and refugee problems. International migration and refugee, including asylum seekers and internally displaced people, have become more prominent on the international agenda in recent years, both because of their increasing scale and growing impact on international affairs. As the number of international boundaries containing the new state has increased, so too has the volume of international migrants and refugees. Around the globe, there are 60 million people who are forced to leave their home country to escape war, violence, and persecution. Majority of these people have to fled or run away from their homes, but they are still within their own country. This is what we call internally displaced person. And others cross border and look for shelter outside of their country. These people are called refugees. Refugees are people who are outside their own country and they are unable to return to their home due to fear of being persecuted or being harassed because of their identity, such as their religion, political beliefs, sexual orientation, and many other factors. Most of the refugees are children. Some of them are unaccompanied by adults. These children experience child labor or sexual exploitation. Refugees undergo dangerous journey with uncertain outcomes. Various confusion is made about the difference of the terms migrants and refugees. So I will discuss about the difference of these two terminologies, the migrants and the refugees. Basically, migrants are the people leave their country to search for better economic opportunities, or to find work, or to have better living conditions. They leave their country not to avoid persecution, while refugees are people fled because of violence and persecution. They experience discrimination, xenophobia, and racism. Displaced people apply for asylum, that is considered as the first legal step. At this point, they become an asylum seeker, and finally, they are not officially recognized as a refugee until the application has been granted. As the number of international boundaries containing new states has increased, therefore the number of migrants and refugees will also increase. This becomes one of the contemporary global issues that we are faced today. According to the webpage of United Nations, UN system, NGOs, and partners are all working to highlight the issue, to secure commitment for assistance, and to strengthen the collaborative response to crisis.
Michelle Jarab and I'll be discussing global cultural issues. Under global cultural issues is the cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism is the result of cultural globalization, a process whereby information, commodities, and images that have been produced in one part of the world enter into a global flow, meaning it's the domination of one culture over another. This is sometimes portrayed as the McDonaldization, in which fast food industries dominates more and more economic sectors. These economic sectors from other countries produce cultural products. For example, United States has McDonald's, and it has been dominating other countries' economic sectors, most especially here in the Philippines, in which people tends to patronize its products, resulting to a general attitude that creates new culture that may seem like McDonald's is our own product. Next is cultural clash and identity conflicts, which means that leaders usually draw upon cultural similarities to diminish tensions and conversely upon cultural differences and hatreds to promote conflict. Each society may view themselves as the center of the world, meaning that one society views themselves as superior to all and judges other to be inferior by its peculiar frame of reference. In terms of religion, for example, United States believes in Christianity and Romance believes in Catholic. So, where both of them thought that each religion is superior to one another, which resulted to conflict between the two. Here is the implementation of SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, with the help of UN. SDG is the universal call to end poverty, protect the planet, and make sure that people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. If the members agreed on the draft of 17 SDGs, then it is applicable starting from January 2016. The 17th draft of Sustainable Development Goals is presented on the PowerPoint presentation.